While the game takes 2 steps back, it also takes a huge one forwards. About 20 years ago, Ubisoft gained the license to produce Disney-based titles, leading to adaptations of, for example, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Tarzan. By far the most prolific project to come out of this deal was Donald Duck Quack Attack, a series of games spanning 8 machines over 2 generations. What makes these games so fascinating is just how divergent they can be. It's a given that the handheld versions are different for technical reasons, something that also holds true for those found on the GameCube and PlayStation 2. Even so, while the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and PC iterations are all pretty much alike, bar the relative quality of their presentations, the PlayStation's version differs quite a bit despite being on a contemporary machine. Enough so, even to warrant a closer look. The first thing anyone familiar with the Nintendo 64 version will notice is that the cutscenes here are actual pieces of CGI animation instead of being driven by the game's own engine. It's quite an improvement. This is unfortunately also the only thing these graphics do better. Compared with the other versions, they look more pixelated and jagged, while the game as a whole doesn't run quite as smoothly. As such, Quack Attack can look a tad messy and is certainly the worst looking version on the consoles. That isn't to say that this is also an ugly game. It's once again clear that here too Donald has received the bulk of the attention. He is the best animated and detailed character in the game, with especially his agitated nature having been splendidly realized. The various environments also don't look too bad, sporting plenty of little details, and they are also quite dynamic to boot. Sound. This version of Quack Attack features a different soundtrack than the ones for the Nintendo 64, Dreamcast, and PC. Whether it's better or not is mostly a matter of taste. The one for the Nintendo 64 is generally rather mellow in tone and is also content to be a backdrop to the action instead of actually driving it along. This one does try to spur the player on and also sounds much more grandiose in comparison. Sometimes it's even a bit too much, with these huge compositions blaring from the speakers, causing a slight disconnect with what is actually happening on screen. Still, the score in general forms a rather accomplished whole. One thing I like about it is how certain themes run through it, sometimes in quite subtle ways. Take the various boss themes, for example, which sound pretty much alike, but are still interspersed with these little details to signify which world they take place in. In contrast to the music, the sound effects and voice acting are what you would expect from a game like this. Bouncy and cartoony, in other words. Gameplay? Donald Gladstone Gander and Gyro Gearloose are watching TV at the Inventor's Workshop to see Daisy, these days working as a daring news reporter, infiltrating the castle of the magician Merlock. While watching the live broadcast, the trio witness their friend being discovered by the ne'er-do-well and taken prisoner. It goes without saying that they want to rescue her, and fortunately Gyro has just the machine for the job. Rather predictably, Donald and Gladstone both want to be the one to use this teleporter in order to reach her first, and during their scuffle, the latter is thrown into the device. While it's now without enough power to transport Donald directly to Merlock's castle, not all is lost. Now our hero must travel through various areas in order to collect the energy spheres necessary to provide the teleporter with the required power, with the ultimate goal being to defeat the evil wizard and rescue Daisy. One common feature of the Quack Attack games on the consoles is that the platforming action is divided into 2 types. There are the Crash Bandicoot OK 3D stages, where Donald runs away from the screen through corridor-like areas, and there are also the more traditional side-glassing areas. Both types roughly share the same kind of obstacles, items, traps, and enemies, as well as the overall goal of finding those orbs. Even so, the variation this setup provides is more than welcome. What's more, this is one thing where the PlayStation version actually differs rather profoundly from its siblings. Whereas in those games there is a strict separation between the 3D and side-girl stages, here they can both feature in a single level. The dynamic feeling this adds to the game as the stage itself twists and turns between the 2 perspectives cannot be underestimated, and is also what ultimately saved the PlayStation version for me, but more on that later. Donald can run, jump, and double jump, while foes are defeated by bouncing on their heads or kicking and punching them. The game seems to rely quite strongly on the double jump. As you would expect, it allows Donald to reach otherwise inaccessible platforms and such. More importantly, though, this jump also comes in handy when fumbling your way through the game, correcting mistimed leaps and getting out of danger in general. This is especially crucial during the 3D levels where it can be rather tricky to judge where Donald is going to end up after a leap. The controls do generally feel a bit sluggish, with the biggest culprit being that their responsiveness isn't quite sharp enough. It furthermore doesn't help that throwing punches can be a bit hit and miss, and that during the side glowing stages, Donald can still move to the fore and the back. A useless action, yet also one that can royally screw up your jumps and momentum. One of the things Donald is best known for is his hairstring temper. In a cute move, Quack Attack uses this aspect for its health system. When he gets hit, our hero throws a tantrum and becomes invulnerable for a short while. Afterwards, he will stomp forwards, anger radiating from every pore. When he gets hit once again, Donald loses a life. Both his health and good mood are restored by picking up milkshakes, which also causes Donald to become temporarily invincible while dashing forwards, bashing everything and everyone out of his way. During his adventure, Donald will have plenty of things to do. There are enemies to defeat and items to collect, including stars for extra lives and the aforementioned orbs to activate a level's exit. He will also encounter obstacles such as pits, platforms, statues that spit fire, and such lovely elements like swinging spiked balls, conveyor belts, and steam venting valves. There are also some things that didn't appear in the other versions, such as dynamite that needs to be kicked back, or having to punch the workmen down before using them as a trampoline. All these elements are used to good effect, resulting in lengthy levels featuring enough secrets, acrobatics, and danger to keep them interesting. Sure, there are some missteps here and there resulting in cheap deaths, leaps of faith, and even some times where you have to guess whether something is actually harmful. But on the whole, the level design is pretty sound. Scattered throughout the levels are toys belonging to Donald's nephews. These have unfortunately been cursed by Merlock, and this spell can only be lifted by smashing the accompanying floating books. When damaged, a timer begins to count down and Donald must reach the toy before it runs out. This whole setup starts out simple enough with both book and toy being close to each other. Later on, however, reaching them can become quite tricky. Collecting all of them results in a bonus level being unlocked where Donald has to frantically dash towards the screen while being chased by a large enemy. Although in the Nintendo 64 version, finishing the chase level unlocked Gladstone's speedrunning challenge, here it's available as soon as you complete a stage. This basically means you have to go through the thing again, but now within a time limit. This remains one of Quack Attack's neatest tricks, as running through these areas you previously carefully navigated is both highly enjoyable and also reveals their distinct sense of flow and momentum. On a given run, you'll see Donald just catching that floating platform before bouncing off a flying enemy to a higher ledge where a projectile just zips past, and so on and so forth. Not all levels are equally tightly designed, sure, but enough fortunately are. Completing all the speedruns within a world unlocks a costume for Donald, which, while purely cosmetic, can be worth it just for the comedy factor alone. This iteration of Quack Attack closely follows the structure of the Nintendo 64 version. Gyro's workplace acts as the game's hub from which Donald can reach the 4 worlds one at a time. Each world is basically a hub in itself, offering 4 stages that can be completed in any order. Freeing all the toys unlocks the chase level, while finding all the spheres activates the boss battle. It's a clear and simply to grasp setup that, for some unfathomable reason, seems to please me greatly. It's probably just a personal quirk, so make of it what you will. The bosses are decidedly of the old school variety where they attack in a set pattern, which you have to survive before taking advantage of some unfortunate weakness on their part. Quack Attack likes to make a spectacle of these fights, and they are generally fun. It's interesting to note that of the 4 battles on offer, the last 2 are different from the Nintendo 64 version. That doesn't necessarily make them better, but it's in keeping with the way the game handles its content. On that note, I mentioned earlier how the more dynamic mix of 3D and side-scrolling saved the game for me. Point is, the impression I got from the first world was that this was a worse-looking and playing iteration of what I had previously played on Nintendo's contemporary console. Despite some changes to the overall level design, the theme and structure hadn't changed. And then Donald arrived in Duckburg, and everything changed. Suddenly, there was that switching about with perspective, culminating in a chase level that begins with our hero sprinting after a squirrel, then switches to a sideway view before finally Donald turns towards the screen and starts running away for dear life from a demonic car. Together with all the little changes mentioned above, it's this that makes it worthwhile to play through this PlayStation version, even if you've already experienced another Quack Attack. Then again, this switching of perspective does come with its own flaw, as the camera can occasionally fail to pick the best position. That this doesn't make surviving the various dangers any easier is a given, and this also applies to the aforementioned issues with the controls. Quack Attack is still an easy game as long as you pay some attention to what is going on, lest we forget that lives are plentiful, as are checkpoints, and there is little here that will really endanger Donald, but this issue can lead to quite a few unnecessary restarts. Final remarks. For what may initially come across as an inferior iteration of another game, the PlayStation's take on Quack Attack does manage to redeem itself to an extent. The switching perspectives, different boss battles, and other little deviations can even make this a worthwhile proposition for those that have already played another version. The music alone, while a tad overblown, is of enough interest to give the game a go. Let's also not forget that at its core, Quack Attack is a fun little romp, and doubly so for any fan off the hot-headed sailor. Still, all this doesn't quite wipe away that initial impression. This game does play more sluggishly than its peers. The visuals are slightly worse, even if the cutscenes do look better than those found on the Nintendo 64. And this Quack Attack can occasionally feel a tad rickety and rough around the edges, and that is on top of the game's inherent issues such as the sometimes tricky to judge jumps and overall low challenge. If you have to choose only a single version of Quack Attack to play, I would say you're better off trying the one for Nintendo's console or its direct remakes for the Dreamcast or the PC. Perhaps you're more inclined to try one of the handheld versions, both of which are more traditional platformers, with the Game Boy Color one being a lot of fun. If, on the other hand, you have some time to spare, you could do worse than give Donald's Adventures on the PlayStation a go. Just keep in mind that it won't be his finest hour.